Yesterday, the Transport Secretary Chris Grayling assured this programme that his department had done detailed work on the financial and operational plans of the British company Seabourne Freight, which has been contracted to supply ferries between Ramsgate and Ostend in the event of a no-deal Brexit. But we have been told that Chief Executive Ben Sharp once ran a shipping company that ceased trading, owing more than £1 million to multiple shipping companies. Mr Sharp has denied the allegations. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, has this exclusive report.
Your eyes are drawn to the slick exec in the middle, but in fact it's this man, Ben Sharp, who's the chief executive of Seabourne Freight, one of 3 key shipping firms responsible for the flow of critical food and medical supplies between Britain and Europe in the event of a no deal. He's landed a £14 million contract to run services between the port of Ramsgate and Ostend in Belgium. But just 3 months from Brexit, Seabourne Freight hasn't bought or chartered a single vessel. And there are growing concerns about the firm's suitability to handle the operation. Ben Sharp has described himself and his shipping executives as experienced old dogs, but Channel 4 News has uncovered details about his past dealings that throw into question the level of due diligence carried out by the government before handing Seabourne Freight the no-deal contract. Several of his former business associates told this programme that a company previously run by Mr Sharp left them hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket when it was forced to shut down in 2013. These claims come from businesses not in the English Channel, but the warm waters of the Red Sea and Somali coast, where pirates for years terrorised the shipping route. It was here that Mr Sharp ran Mercator International, a firm which is described on his LinkedIn page as providing armed escort vessels for ships heading through these hazardous waters. Mr Sharp and Mercator chartered the vessels from several companies, one of which was called Palm Charters. Now, a senior source inside that firm says Mr Sharp ran up debts of more than $500,000 when leasing Palm Charters vessels. The source said he repeatedly asked Ben Sharp for the money, but the full debt was never repaid. And when Mercator collapsed, it still owed $290,000 to Palm Charter. Another shipping firm, Mid-Gulf Offshore, told this programme it lost more than $1 million after Mercator ceased trading.
We've done due diligence on them, we've done detailed work on their financial plans and on their operational plans. I want this service to run.
The government insists it has done the required checks on Seabourne Freight, and tonight, in a statement, Ben Sharp told us
Palm Charters had dealings with Mercator, which came to an end when Palm Charters reneged on a contract which gave rise to a complex commercial dispute. The amounts alleged to have been in dispute are denied.
He added,
the claim allegedly made by Mid-Gulf is denied.
The Department for Transport said,
before any contract was signed, due diligence on Seabourne Freight was carried out both by senior officials at the Department for Transport and highly reputable, independent, third-party organisations.
The government insists that Seabourne won't get a single penny until the service is up and running. But the question tonight remains, should this start-up firm have been awarded the contract in the first place?
Well, the previous careers of the people running Seabourne Freight don't seem to be the only issue at question. Ed Howker is here to explain more. Ed.
Well, in addition to this question about whether this firm has enough votes, which has been popular on social media, there's also a question about whether or not they've yet got signed contracts with the 2 ports they intend to operate with. Today, I found out that at Ramsgate Port, they're still in discussions, and Seabourne are also in a position where they've negotiated a deal with Ostend, but haven't signed that either. And in fact, the chairman of the Port of Ostend told me today that they need to have the capital, and it's not proven that they've done that. Until that point happens, that contract won't be signed. Seabourne themselves say that they've completed raising funds, about £27 million that they were advertising for last year. But then they also say they're still in detailed negotiations. So I'm not quite sure what the position is with that. As for the Department for Transport, they state that the condition of the contract is that obviously Seabourne does have these operator contracts with the ports and that no public money is at risk, but you've got to consider the context of all of this, because this contract, worth £13.8 million, VAT on top of that potentially, was given because Extreme urgency exists in the context of the EU-UK ferry capacity. That's what the contract actually says. And if it's so extremely urgent, why is it the case that it's been awarded to a company that doesn't have operator contracts with either of the ports it intends to operate from, or apparently has completed raising the money needed to operate the ferries?
And how come? Well, now joining us now from Middlesbrough is the Shadow Secretary of State for Transport, Andy MacDonald. Andy MacDonald, where do you come down on this? I mean, Mr. Grayling said everything's been done. We've had some very reputable people doing all the due diligence, the very senior people in the department and the rest of it. That should be enough to satisfy you, shouldn't it?
I'm sorry, I don't accept when Mr. Grayling promises things, they have a habit of unravelling very, very quickly. And either the predecessor firm of this chap, Mr. Sharp, went bust owing lots of money, or it did not. That's a pretty simple question for the government to answer. And similarly, they either have the sufficient capital to get the contract to trade between Ramsgate and Ostend or not. These are the questions that need to be answered. I've asked Mr. Grayling to produce that information and produce the contract, because there are very serious misgivings. And I congratulate Channel 4 for the excellent investigation work that it's done. And so there are huge issues now for him to address, and he's got to come clean, and I'll be progressing this and pursuing it in the House of Commons next week.
Will one of the questions that you'll be asking, how many firms were actually considered for this contract? Indeed, did anybody else actually even bid?
Well, that goes to the heart of it, John. And what I'm asking is that was there any competition at all? Because there really ought to have been. And who are these people who suddenly appear not having any ferries? And there's a real issue about the availability of the vessels. And there's also issues about the ability to berth roll-on, roll-off ferries at Ramsgate, the state of readiness of the port. So there are huge questions here. But how on earth a company appears from nowhere and suddenly is given this sort of contract? And of course, it's really been quite comical today. It would be comical if it wasn't so serious. The way their terms and conditions of trading with others appears on the face of it to have been lifted from a takeaway business of all things. So it looks quite ludicrous, but it's immensely serious. And the government have got to come clean and answer these questions as a matter of urgency, because the concerns will not go away unless they do.
Does Labour believe that this is for real, or do you now begin to see any kind of a suggestion that scare tactics are being made to try and persuade people like you to support the government's deal?
Well, if it is a tactic of that nature, it won't work. What Theresa May and Chris Grayling can't do is hold a gun to the country's head and say you support our deal or the country gets it. That's a ludicrous proposition. And of course, when we return, we'll be progressing the issue to say no deal should not be an option that the government should actively pursue, which makes all of this expenditure, it's not the only way money is being scattered around like confetti in support of a ludicrous and reckless and dangerous no deal, has been carried out over the last several weeks and months. And they've got to come to their senses that there is no consensus in the House of Commons to support a no-deal proposition. So they need to put that one to one side and seriously talk to us and others about getting a deal that will bring not just the House of Commons together, but the country.
Wouldn't Labour's position be greatly strengthened if, in fact, it made its own position on Brexit infinitely clearer than it has done thus far? Well,
I hear that, John, but I mean, you're very familiar with the motion that was passed at conference, and it is phased and it is sensible, and we will have the vote soonest, apparently week commencing the 14th of January, and we've set out there that we will be voting down this deal, and in the event of it being voted down, we will be demanding a general election. But clearly, the option of a second referendum is a live one, and it is contained within the motion. So there is agreement about that being a viable alternative should those events unfold in the way that we've described.
But to be honest,
it is there as...
Yeah, but if Labour were in fact to put some sort of degree of support for the government's position on its own deal, it wouldn't then need to be having to fight against a no-deal option.
Well, we're saying that the no-deal option should be put to one side altogether. I mean,
well, how are you going to secure that? How are you going to secure that? Are you going to put a motion down to prevent it happening?
Yes, that's absolutely right. To prevent no deal happening, that is part of the amendment. But what we must see that off. And what Theresa May is saying to us is the best way to avoid no deal is to vote for her proposition. But she's delayed that. She's robbed Parliament of the opportunity of voting on her proposition, and she needs to get that right. And on the day that it is voted down, she will have 21 days. I rather suspect it's going to be quicker than that. She'll come back within 24 hours. And it's the what happens next. And that's the issue that we've got to focus on, in my view. That's
Mr.
where
MacDonald,
we'll end up.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us.